Chinese architectural monumentality probably calls to mind these two powerful images, the poster pictures of China and the ones through which the fundamental principles of construction and planning are articulated. Principles such as enclosure in courtyards, axiality, symmetry, importance of gates, that is, especially in the Forbidden City. In both cases, you are looking at visual monumentality. I am going to show you today that monumentality in Chinese construction is not related to size. Monumentality is defined in China's primary, singular, and unique architectural treatise, Yingzhao Fa, which translates as building standards. It was compiled under a man named Li Jie, who lived from 1035 to 1110. He was an official in the Directorate of Construction, and he issued this by order of the Emperor Huizong, whose court codified other aspects of Chinese civilization, such as the treatise that you see on the right. It codified his imperial painting collection. Building Standards is 34 chapters, and the last 6 of them are illustrated. The first 2, you're looking at the table of contents here, are a glossary of 48 of the most important Chinese architectural terms. The third term is this one. So 1, 2, 3. The third term is this one, dian, which can be translated or defined as a large hall. But its explanation, so here dian, and then the explanation, coming from sources of classical Chinese writings, its explanation drawn from these writings tells us always about the module and nothing about the size. For instance, we are told that a ritual structure called Mingtang was 9 chur across the front and 7 chur in depth. Chur is the length of a floor mat. The Record of Rituals says that the Hall of the Son of Heaven is 9 chur, the marquise, 7 chur, the officials, 5 chur, and the scholar officials, 3 chur. And so I have been right here, and for the first definition, I was over here. I was just now, as I said, right here. The Mencius tells us that the halls of the type of building known as Tang of the legendary emperors Yao and Shun were only 3 chur, but the absolute length of the chur is never stated, for it changes with time. What we have before us is a ranked system, as well as the clear evidence of a module. The Building Standards follows a long list of writings about Chinese architecture. Arya, which you see on the left, we can translate this title as Approaching Elegance. Chinese characters are right here. It was compiled in the last decades of the first millennium BCE, and it defines approximately 80 architectural terms. More than 40 of them are shown in this building section, named here and then labeled. Many of them are also shown, and their definitions are drawn from this text in the Building Standards. This text, Rules of Construction and Repair, here's the Chinese name, Yingshanling, dates 713 to 741, states that the interior of an eminent hall or an important hall, a hall of the dian type that I just showed you, should have a caisson ceiling, sometimes called a lantern ceiling, sometimes called a cupola ceiling. What you're seeing here is the oldest surviving lantern ceiling in wood in China. There are earlier examples from around the year 0, the one here probably from the very early centuries CE. But again, one relies on the text to tell us what should be in an important building. No dimensions. Now you are about to look at 2 of the largest halls that survive from China. This is one of them. It is elevated 4 meters. It is approached by a 32.42 by 18.48 platform that you see right here. The hall itself, 53.75 by 29 meters. That's 176.3 by 95 feet. This is only China's second largest building, a mere 48.2 meters or 160 meters across the front by 25.13 in depth, elevated on a 3-meter platform with base dimensions 55.8 by 25.91 meters. The approach platform 35 by 15 meters. As a point of comparison, the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the one that you see here now, the 4th version, is smaller, but even when it was constructed in the 15th century and was 1.5 times its current size, 64 meters across the front by 36 meters. And the marble podium on which it stands, 8.13 meters high. So the two buildings that I showed you just a moment ago, and now we look at them and their details are actually just about as large, but they date to the 11th century, the time of the building standards. The building standards tells us, among its many important dictums, concerning all rules in wooden construction, the module, psi, and here it is, here is the module, is the ideal proportions of 3:2 or 15:10 is how it's shown here. And then often there is a subsidiary module. This is what is going to link into another piece of timber. The modules derive from right here, the cross section of a bracket arm. Neither of the buildings that I just showed you has the modular proportions to be an eminent or monumental hall. And this is in spite of their size. You have the names and the dates here. Daxiongbao is a name for an important Buddhist hall in a monastery setting. These two buildings are eminent halls. And this one dates to 857, and this one dates to 984. And it is possible to have two roofs as well as a surrounding porch. This is actually considered a mezzanine layer, but the interior is open as if one story. This building, which is much more complicated, is not a diantong. Its pieces do not have the perfect proportional ratio. Here, instead, you are looking at bracket sets with a ratio of 25.5 to 17. In other words, very close to perfection, but not quite. The bracket sets here at the Guanyin Pavilion, if you take them apart and you look at and you measure the cross section here of a bracket arm, are 27 to 18 centimeters. The bracket sets here are, as I said, close, 25.5 to 17, but not perfect. This building, built over a 50-year period beginning in the year 1038, is the purest diantong, or monumental hall, that I can show you from the 11th century, perfect according to the building standards, and it is imperial. There are other criteria that one looks for in assessing that these three buildings are perfect monumental halls. One of them is two rings of columns, an outer and an inner. The outer, the inner, you see it here. You see it here even in a gate. Buildings that are not of the highest rank or monumental, according to the building standards, have but a single exterior set of pillars, and then those pillars are what support the outside of the building. There are, in fact, 18 variations on the theme of what is an eminent hall, and these are all articulated in the building standards. So these two enormous buildings that you see here are not monumental halls, but they also are not buildings of the next rank, what are called in Chinese ting tong, but which can be translated as hall. Both of them are imperial, as were the three buildings that I showed you a moment ago that I said these are eminent halls and built by imperial construction. The two buildings that you see here can be called, I would suggest, hybrids. They possess features that define them as, in part, eminent halls, but in part, buildings that are less eminent. One defining feature of eminence is that a building must have a bracket set of higher than fifth rank. Here you are looking at a page from the building standards. The most eminent bracket set, 8th rank, 7th rank, 6th rank, 5th rank. Those two halls contain in places 5th rank bracket sets. Second, the interior and the exterior features have to be separated by at least 2 rafter lengths. And so length between rafters. Here, in fact, this is correctly according to eminent construction. Pillars of the exterior should be shorter than pillars of the interior. And this is a feature that is not of diantong status. So how did this happen? How is it that imperial construction, promulgated at the court and built by craftsmen whom we know had the building standards, ends up not to be of structural eminence or monumentality? In other words, the most significant kind of hall. The buildings that I just showed you were built in North China under a dynasty called Liao. Those in South China were built. The other 3 that I showed you include one built by this dynasty, one, however, built by this dynasty, and then one built before then, the previous dynasty, Tang. This one, in other words, was built in South China. These two, North China by Liao. I'm now looking at interior decoration, paintings, inside 2 tombs of the Liao dynasty. This is the tomb of an emperor. This is his reign date. And both of them are in the same prefecture, Chifeng Prefecture of Eastern Inner Mongolia. Although what you see here is painted, you are looking at a bracket set with only 1 level of arm and 3 rises above it. Here, and I can show you this unfortunately only in line drawing, 2 levels and brackets arms that fan out perpendicular, parallel to the building plane as you see here, but also perpendicular and also at 90-degree angles. It is certain that the person who patronized this tomb, or I should say who was in charge of building it, knew the building standards. This is a page from the building standards. This is an explanation of a page from the building standards, and they explain the gradations of color and patterns on color. This bracket set is so simple, it actually is only 4th rank. And so how is it that these bracket sets are higher rank and do not belong to an emperor? The bracketing that you see on the left comes from the tomb of someone who is a member of the consort clan. The Liao is a dynasty in which there's an imperial family. The wives come from the consort clan. A woman of the imperial family is married to a husband from the consort clan. entering the afterlife, whether known to the rulers or not. The consort clan would be entering with identifiably higher status. Did the emperors know this? We don't know. But the building standards were known, they were used, and they were used precisely as you see here. So that when an emperor builds an enormous hall in the Liao dynasty, the fact that certain kinds of bracket sets are chosen and larger, more complicated bracket sets could work has to be intentional. This is also a building built by the Liao dynasty, also in Chifeng County of Inner Mongolia. The prefecture is Qingzhou. It is enormous, and when I show you a detail, the bracket sets are in part, but not exclusively. These are what a diantong, or most eminent structure, should have. These are not. This man, you see his name was Chunming Da, measured all four of the buildings of the Liao dynasty that we have been discussing today. He did this sometime after the year 1938. He was trained exclusively in China. He, as I said, measured each of these buildings, all of them Liao buildings, and he published either long articles or the most important monograph on each one. One of the studies was co-published by his two teachers, Liang Sicheng, perhaps a name known to you, Liao Dunjun, perhaps a name not as well known. Liang is working in North China. Liao Dunjun is working in South China in and around Nanjing. During the war with Japan, late 1930s, they came together in southwestern China. That was when this man received training. There is no question that they knew the building standards, and there is no question because they both wrote extremely important books about the building standards. During this 12-year period, the man whom I just showed you on the right, Liang Sicheng, was one of the three chief architects and an important selection designer in the ultimate design for the National Central Museum in the city of Nanjing. It stands today. Liang chose these two buildings for his models. Liang knew well that they did not follow the building standards. As I mentioned to you, he was the teacher of Chunming Da, who physically went to them and measured them. Liang had done some measurement of one of them in the 1930s, and he also taught the building standards as a course for all his years teaching at Tsinghua University. He knew that these two buildings from the Song Dynasty, from farther south in China, and yes, Nanjing is in the south, so his choice was not based on regional desires. These two buildings from the 11th century that follow the building standards were not selected. Liang once wrote that when he looked at this building, he felt like he was walking into a painting. He chose, in other words, somber and large size for civic architecture, not something that could ever be called elegant or delicate. And he chose sheer size, but not monumentality according to the building standards. As a final point, I would like to say that this understanding not only of the monument, but of the module is inherent in all imperial Chinese construction through the end of imperial times into the early 20th century. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, the most important building at the Forbidden City, is in every respect modular. Every piece has been measured. It's so carefully modular, sometimes it can be considered almost the building pieces can almost be considered repetitive because all of them, for instance, are made of straight pieces. There aren't even any curves. Why is it then that one feels breathless and as if he has experienced monumentality at the Forbidden City? I would suggest that when one goes to the Forbidden City, he goes upstairs, he goes over a threshold, he walks inside, he goes over that threshold again and goes down and continues straight, upstairs, over a threshold, straight, over and down a threshold and down. And he has started at the farthest southern point. There used to be different kind of architecture, of course, in Tiananmen Square in imperial times. And by the time he's gone only 2 kilometers, approximately 2 kilometers, he is experientially feeling monumentality. But this is, in this case, because of the module, not exclusively because of the pieces that that module dictates. And so it is important to know that the layout of the Forbidden City itself, in which this experiential monumentality works, is indeed modular. Each of the rectangles that you see here is a 5:9 proportion, so that this distance is twice this distance. And the 3 great halls have equidistant here and here, equidistant here and here, and that, for instance, the width of Beijing in the 15th century compared to the east-west width of the Forbidden City. So this width compared to this width was just under a 9-to-1 ratio. 9 is a number that is symbolic of the Chinese emperor. This kind of monumentality through the modular expression of it, persists all through the city of Beijing or through its parts in imperial times. Monumentality, in other words, in China is achieved by the module, and it is achieved by the written word. When sheer size was necessitated, a builder knew how to achieve it, but the builder in that instance would often break apart from the building standards. Thank you very much.